Did the CIA just try to overthrow President Donald Trump to cover up the origins of Russiagate in Ukraine on behalf of Joe Biden? Hello, this is Robert Romano, Vice President of Public Policy with Americans for Limited Government, dailytorch.com. Hit that subscribe button. Today we're going to be talking about Ukraine again, the origins of Russiagate, and the Central Intelligence Agency. It turns out that this so-called whistleblower that falsely accused President Trump of conditioning military assistance to Ukraine on an investigation of Joe Biden, well, he was a CIA officer who was detailed to the White House. And this is outrageous. Presidential conversations with foreign leaders should not be winding up in the press, yet that's exactly what happened here with the whistleblower complaint. It wound up in the pages of the New York Times and the Washington Post on September 19th. And I want to say that this is unprecedented, but the fact is this has happened to President Trump. This would be the third time by my count. In 2017, President's conversations with the leaders of Mexico and Australia wound up in the press. And at Americans for Limited Government, we were outraged. Americans for Limited Government President Rick Manning, he called for H.R. McMaster, then the National Security Advisor, to be fired over the National Security Council leaks. The National Security Council is at the White House, is responsible for these transcripts of presidential conversations with foreign leaders. Intelligence and the State Department and officials will usually use these to help formulate policy and to be advised and educated about where the president is and what the conversations are so that they can better set policy. I went a little further. I said the entire National Security Council staff should be fired because I had a bunch of Obama holdovers in there who were trying to undermine the president's policies on the southern border wall, refugees, and immigration. And Rick Manning, ALG president, he had a piece then in Fox News that said Trump should fire McMaster and the entire NSC staff. We were very outraged, and rightly so. This is presidential conduct of foreign affairs, and it's being undermined by the intelligence community. And it just keeps on happening. And very few people have access to these transcripts, and so. And this should have never been elevated, and yet it was by the Inspector General of the intelligence community. Even though it contained numerous factual errors, it was deemed credible. They didn't check with the Ukrainian president, who says nobody pushed him. You think, if someone's accusing the president of pressuring Ukraine, maybe check with Ukraine, check with the president, Volodymyr Zelensky, who says nobody pushed me. And it also, a Ukrainian official cast doubt on the quid pro quo claim. An unnamed Ukrainian official said that Kiev was not made aware that the U.S. suspended security funds until a month after President Trump's call with his Ukrainian counterpart. And there were other errors. It references Rudy Giuliani, the whistleblower, so-called whistleblower, accuses Giuliani of freelancing as he's going to Ukraine to coordinate with the officials and to bring information to their attention. But it was the State Department that urged Giuliani to go to Ukraine to help mend fences and to improve U.S.-Ukrainian relations. There were other inaccuracies. It referenced the former prosecutor, the whistleblower complaint referenced the former prosecutor general in Ukraine, but the conversation didn't do that at all. And so there was just an inaccurate recounting of the conversation in this whistleblower complaint, which gets elevated by the IG. Fortunately, the Justice Department shot it down and said this was not a credible it wasn't legally grounded to say that this was a whistleblower, a real whistleblower, and that it needed to be forwarded to the intelligence agencies. What you had here was a policy disagreement by intelligence officials and I guess some people at the White House that was elevated and became now a cause for impeachment. Nancy Pelosi wants to impeach Donald Trump over this. And I think that's just outrageous. So let's unpack this a little bit. We have the July 25 conversation with President Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. It's now declassified. We can read it and see for ourselves that there was no pressure. President Trump wasn't conditioning military assistance. The only discussion of military assistance was that Europe was not doing enough to provide military aid to Ukraine to serve as a check on Russia. And in the meantime, Zelensky was thanking the United States for its assistance and foreign aid. And oh, by the way, the military assistance, it's not even an issue anymore. It was briefly put on pause this summer as pending a review by the State Department, but the White House released that aid on September 11. And so I don't know why this is an issue now. But in any event, Trump asked for Ukraine's assistance in getting to the bottom of the origins of the phony Russiagate investigation that was in the conversation by intelligence agencies in 2016. And he also brought the firing of Ukraine's prosecutor general at former Vice President Joe Biden's urging when he threatened $1 billion of loan guarantees to Zelensky's attention. And Zelensky says, I'm aware of that. I've heard of that, and so it wasn't anything that needed to be brought to Zelensky's attention. They're already aware of it. They're on top of that. But nonetheless, Biden was saying, bragging to the Council of Foreign Relations. He threatened then Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko with the $1 billion unless he fired Shokin, the former prosecutor general. He said, you're not getting the billion. I'm going to be leaving here. And I think it was about 6 hours. I looked at them and said, I'm leaving in 6 hours. If the prosecutor is not fired, you're not getting the money. Well, son of a bitch, he got fired. And they put someone in place who was solid at the time. The person who was who got fired was investigating Joe Biden's son for and Burisma Holdings for tax evasion. There were charges that might have been brought into this Burisma Holdings company that Hunter Biden, Joe Biden's son, served on. And he only got the job because Joe Biden was the vice president, and Joe Biden's shutting down an investigation into that company. I think that's pretty darn corrupt. Also, Joe Biden was given wide latitude with Ukraine. He served over Ukraine policy following the 2014 overthrow of Viktor Yanukovych. He was a pro-Russia president of Ukraine, and so the United States backed a coup, pushed Yanukovych out. Poroshenko comes in, and Biden's overseeing Ukraine policy at that point. And so he clearly had his hands here in Ukraine, and I think that's it's relevant. The intelligence whistleblower implied that the U.S. could be withholding military assistance, but again, there was no coercion that could be found. Politico's Caitlin Emma and Connor O'Brien first reported the pause in aid in late August, and they noted that the United States military aid to Ukraine has long been seen as a litmus test for how strongly the American government is pushing back against Moscow, close quote. And surely it's viewed that way. The question of military assistance to Ukraine, which the Obama administration rejected. The Trump administration has been giving military assistance to Ukraine. But in any event, that was long an element of the now debunked conspiracy theory that the president was a Russian agent. And that allegation actually originated with the Christopher Steele dossier. He said that President Trump was a bought and paid for Russian agent. He also suggested that the Trump campaign had completed the hacking of the DNC and putting the emails on WikiLeaks in tandem with Russia. Quote, well-developed conspiracy of cooperation between Trump and Russian leadership. And also the hacking had occurred with, quote, the full knowledge and support of Trump and senior members of his campaign team. In return, the Trump team had agreed to sideline Russian intervention in Ukraine as a campaign issue. So this is a long-standing false allegation, as it turns out, against President Trump. Since Bob Mueller, special counsel, he debunked this idea that there was any conspiracy between Trump, his campaign, and the Russian government to steal the 2016 election. They just didn't find it, and that's why President Trump is still president. The facts could have destroyed President Trump, but they didn't because he was innocent all along. And so you had this concocted story that Trump was a Russian agent that was put into the intelligence community and into the FISA court. They got spying on the President Trump and his campaign in 2016, and it was on this phony allegation. And a large part of those allegations actually originated overseas with the UK British spy, but also Ukraine had an effort to sabotage Trump in 2016, according to Politico. Donald Trump wasn't the only presidential campaign candidate whose campaign was boosted by officials of a former Soviet bloc country. Ukrainian government officials tried to help Hillary Clinton undermine Trump by publicly questioning his fitness for office. They also disseminated documents implicating a top Trump aid in corruption and suggested they were investigating the matter only to back away after the election, and they helped Clinton's allies research damaging information on Trump and his advisors, a Politico investigation has found. So you had the United States government coordinating with the Ukrainian government officials to dig up dirt on President Trump during the election. And the Clinton campaign, they paid for the Steele dossier out of Britain. So you had plenty of foreign interference in the elections. It's just that, everyone wants to talk about Russia and hacking the DNC, but the Obama administration and the Clinton campaign and Joe Biden, they were going to these foreign governments and obtaining information. Steele says his sources were Russian. You had the Ukrainian effort. But nobody wants to talk about that, so we're going to talk about it. And it's just a conspiracy theory. Trump was no Russian agent, and none other than Bob Mueller found that out. Now, next, according to the complaint, the disgruntled White House officials complained about the Ukraine policy Trump was taking to a U.S. intelligence official who writes that he or she did not have access to the conversation, but transcribed it and the gist of it in the so-called whistleblower complaint. Then it goes to the IG. The IG actually noted that this was politically biased. Quote, the ICG's preliminary review identified some indicia of an arguable political bias on the part of the complainant in favor of a rival political candidate. But despite the bias, plus the fact that it was hearsay and that it contained numerous factual errors, remarkably, the complaint was found to be credible. Justice Department, however, rejected its legal merits. New York Times picks it up a few days later, about a couple weeks later. I guess they were upset that the complaint didn't get transferred to the Intelligence Committee, so somebody decided, well, we need to get this to the press. We need to illegally leak this and violate federal law in order to get this into the New York Times and the Washington Post. Now the New York Times reports that it was a CIA agent. And then this was elevated by senior intelligence officials at the Inspector General's office. This looks really, really bad. Pelosi's now calling for impeachment based off of this. And so this raises some troubling questions, but we'll get to that in a second. In sum, you had a politically motivated CIA complaint against President Trump on Ukraine policy that led instantly to an impeachment push by Democrats in the House of Representatives. Was that the point? Since these disclosures, the Trump administration is pushing back. Justice Department had John Durham is a U.S. attorney. He's investigating foreign intelligence intervention in the 2016 elections with this counterintelligence probe into the Trump campaign, falsely accusing him of being a Russian agent. And Durham was his investigation was referenced in this this whistleblower complaint. And so the Justice Department dutifully went out and confirmed the investigation on September 25th. Carrie Kupek, Justice Department spokeswoman, said, quote, a Department of Justice team led by U.S. Attorney John Durham is separately exploring the extent to which a number of countries, including Ukraine, played a role in the counterintelligence investigation directed at the Trump campaign during the 2016 election. While the Attorney General has yet to contact Ukraine in connection with this investigation, certain Ukrainians who are not members of the government have volunteered information to Mr. Durham, which he is evaluating. Now, the whistleblower, so-called whistleblower, directly references the Durham investigation. He also references the efforts of Rudy Giuliani and reporting by the Hill's John Solomon to uncover the same about the origins of the Russiagate investigation. A footnote in the whistleblower complaint, it states, in an interview with Fox News on August 8th, Mr. Giuliani claimed that Mr. John Durham, whom Attorney General Barr designated to lead the probe, was, quote, spending a lot of time in Europe because he was, quote, investigating Ukraine. I do not know the extent to which, if at all, Mr. Giuliani is directly coordinating his efforts on Ukraine with Attorney General Barr or Mr. Durham. So But here's the thing: if the concern was about Joe Biden and Trump asking about Joe Biden or referencing his seeming corruption to get his son off the hook for his company Burisma on tax evasion in Ukraine, if it was all about Biden and the military assistance, why complain about Barr and Durham? Why reference the Durham investigation into the counterintelligence probe and then tie them to Trump, Giuliani, and John Solomon? It only appears to be relevant to the complaint in order to discredit the Justice Department's ongoing investigation. That makes the Justice Department, Barr, Durham, that makes them the targets of this complaint as well, in addition to Trump. And so Trump is trying to get to the bottom of the origins of Russiagate. In his phone call with Zelensky, Biden comes up to and Ukrainian corruption. The president believes the investigation might have originated in Ukraine. Biden ran Obama's Ukraine policy after the overthrow of Yanukovych, the coup the United States backed, and he has bragged about getting the country's top anti-corruption prosecutor fired. It turns out, to get his son off the hook, probably. And the Justice Department is confirming that it is looking into Ukraine. So are Giuliani and Solomon. And so the CIA agent working at the White House, or maybe it was after the fact, Times doesn't stipulate if he was actually at the White House, but he gets all this information, but puts a neat package on it into the whistleblower complaint. It's elevated by senior intelligence officials, even though it was erroneous. And it was fortunately rejected by the Justice Department as a legitimate whistleblower complaint. And then the classified information was illegally parceled out to the New York Times and the Washington Post by somebody in order to make it public. Within a week of the reporting, House Democrats are pushing to impeach Donald Trump. Now, that's a lot of coincidences, don't you think? It gives the appearance that the CIA is trying to, get involved and try to get President Donald Trump impeached. And and surely enough, they appear to be moving in that direction. So did the CIA just try to overthrow President Trump and to discredit Attorney General William Barr, Giuliani, and Solomon to cover up the origins of Russiagate investigation by intelligence agencies that falsely accused Trump of being a Russian agent and his campaign, and to protect Joe Biden? And what did Joe Biden know about the Russiagate investigation, and when did he know it? There's something to that. What did he know? When did he know it? Joe Biden was primarily responsible for Ukraine policy, but he was also sitting in the meetings with President Obama in January of 2017. Former National Security Advisor Susan Rice sent herself an email on the day Trump was inaugurated about a January 5th, 2017 meeting in the Oval Office, in which Rice wrote, quote, "On January 5, following a briefing by intelligence community leadership on Russian hacking during the 2016 election, President Obama had a brief follow-on conversation with FBI Director Jim Comey, Sally Yates, and Joe Biden." This was the Russian interference into the 2016 election briefing given a day before the DNI, James Clapper, issued a joint intelligence assessment that said that Russia was trying to help out Trump in the election by hacking the DNC John Podesta emails and putting them on WikiLeaks. Rice, her involvement in here is very, very troubling. She writes in her email to herself that, according to Rice, former President Obama, who supposedly laughably wanted to make certain that the investigation, which was about to be carried over into the Trump administration, you were going to have James Comey, the Justice Department, investigating the sitting president of the United States without his knowledge, and lied to him about the investigation. That's why Comey got fired, and he should have been fired. And then Obama wanted this, quote, done by the book. And, quote, President Obama began the conversation by stressing his continued commitment to ensuring that every aspect of this issue is handled by the intelligence and law enforcement communities by the book. The president stressed that he is not asking about initiating or instructing anything from a law enforcement perspective. Gee, I wonder why he did that. He reiterated that our law enforcement team needs to proceed as it normally would by the book. From a national security perspective, however, Obama said he wanted to be sure that as we engage with the incoming team, we are mindful to ascertain if there is any reason that we cannot share information fully as it relates to Russia. They wanted to withhold the intelligence community Kennedy and the Justice Department intelligence information about Russia and the investigation from the Trump administration and from President Trump ahead of him being inaugurated. They were afraid that I guess that they would find out about the phony baloney investigation, and then the whole thing would unravel. Maybe that's what they're really, really worried about. Maybe they're worried about President Trump in his conversation with Zelensky out of Ukraine. Trump says, I would like you to do us a favor because our country has been through a lot and Ukraine knows a lot about it. I would like you to find out what happened with the whole situation with Ukraine. They say CrowdStrike, that was the firm hired by the DNC to look into the hacks by Russia, supposedly Russia. Some people question whether Russia actually did the hacking, but let's say they did. CrowdStrike was the one who was hired. Trump says to Zelensky, quote, the server. I guess you have one of your wealthy people, the server. They say Ukraine has the server. I guess they're referencing the DNC server. There are a lot of things that went on, the whole situation. I think you're surrounding yourself with some of the same people. I would like to have the Attorney General call you and your people, and I would like you to get to the bottom of it, as you saw yesterday. Then he references Bob Mueller. But whatever you can do, it's very important that you do it if that's possible. So Trump's trying to get to the bottom of Russiagate. Biden's in on the meeting where Obama's saying, don't tell Trump about the Russiagate investigation. And James Comey, he dutifully does that. Obama wasn't directing Comey to lie to Trump about the investigation. He just suggested it. And then Comey went ahead and lied about it. And he gets fired, and then you get a special counsel. And it takes 2 years after that before you find out that Trump was innocent all along. And so this is an outrageous mess. Nancy Pelosi wants to push impeachment, but I think that we should actually be trying to patch things up with Ukraine. President Trump is doing a great job initiating these conversations with Zelensky. This is how we're going to put this behind us. The United States has been fueling corruption. We helped start the civil war in Ukraine by supporting the overthrow of Yanukovych in 2014. Now the country is divided in half. Thousands of people are dying, and it's kind of our fault. The United States, we got involved there. This was a failed Obama intervention, and now it risks war between the United States and Russia. Trump ran in 2016 on improving U.S.-Russian relations. Well, the way to do that is what he's doing right now. Get with Zelensky, try to patch things up. Maybe we can get a peace agreement there. And put this all behind us. And in the meantime, help Ukraine out with the corruption that the United States has been fueling, that Joe Biden is largely responsible for. The one secret memos, this is John Solomon out of The Hill. You have to check out his reporting. He has been unbelievably awesome with this story. One secret memos cast out on Joe Biden's Ukraine story. Former Vice President Joe Biden, now a 2020 presidential contender, has locked into a specific story about the controversy in Ukraine. He insists that in spring 2016, he strong-armed Ukraine to fire its chief prosecutor solely because Biden believed that the official was corrupt and inept, not because the Ukrainian was investigating a natural gas company, Burisma Holdings, that hired Biden's son, Hunter, into a lucrative job. There's just one problem. Hundreds of pages of never-released memos and documents, many from inside the American team, helping Burisma to stave off its legal troubles, conflict with Biden's narrative, and they raised a troubling prospect that U.S. officials may have painted a false picture in Ukraine to help ease Burisma's legal troubles and to stop prosecutors' plans to interview Hunter Biden during the 2016 presidential election. They were trying to avoid a scandal that might have, if it came public, helped President Trump win. And so this was just more interference by the Obama administration and to cover up the crimes that might have been the corruption that was occurring in Ukraine, that the United States, that the Burisma could have been responsible for. And just this interference, it would have come to light that Biden was firing this prosecutor. Nobody wanted that. And so I think it's a really good question. What did Biden know about the Russiagate investigation? And when did he know it? I mean, all this stuff is happening at lightning speed. We can barely keep up with it. I mean, maybe there was no attempt to overthrow President Trump by the CIA. These could just all be coincidences. Maybe Biden didn't know anything about Russiagate. Maybe he's just a dupe. But I don't think so. I think Joe Biden is in up to his eyeballs with this stuff. I think that he just tweeted. I believe our elections should be decided by the American people, not foreign governments. It's Joe Biden on September 27 saying this. He was responsible for Ukraine policy. Ukraine interfered in the election. They helped concoct the phony myth that President Trump was a Russian agent. So we asked the question at Americans for Limited Government, is Joe Biden the fall guy for Russiagate? ALG President Rick Manning issued the following statement, quote, former Vice President Joe Biden is either the least self-aware person in modern politics, an outrageous liar, or a dupe. Biden was responsible for U.S. policy in Ukraine during the Obama administration, and much of the false narrative about President Donald Trump being a Russian agent came from Ukraine, the United Kingdom, and other Western intel agencies. This is referencing George Papadopoulos. He says that he was spied on and set up with this Joseph Mifsud by Western intelligence agencies, the FBI, and others. And that Mifsud was actually linked to Western intelligence. And you can see him here posing with now Prime Minister Boris Johnson. And these are Mifsud's the one who's supposed to be this Russian agent that Papadopoulos was supposedly lying to investigators about, but it wasn't true. Mifsud appears to be linked to Western intel, not Russian intelligence. And so, in which the administration put a bow on. They took all this BS information, they shipped it to the FISA court with a bow on it so they could spy on Trump and his campaign in 2016. What did Biden know about Russiagate, and when did he know it? It is likely that the former vice president both lacked self-awareness and was set up to be a not-so-innocent dupe, Manning says. What is incredible is that he doesn't seem to realize it. At least when former Washington, D.C. Mayor Marion Barry was caught smoking crack in the Vista Hotel in Washington, he had the awareness to say, bitch, set me up. At some point, the vice president's advisors need to protect him by cluing him in that he is the worst possible messenger on Ukraine, as the scandal highlights his own culpability and avarice to the benefit of his Democratic Party rivals now. If there's a good thing to come out of this, it is that Joe Biden is being exposed as someone who is completely incapable of performing the most basic duties of the presidency before a vote is ever cast. I mean, doesn't want foreign government involvement. He's responsible for foreign government involvement in the U.S. election. So, I mean, maybe there was no attempt by the CIA to overthrow Trump. Maybe Biden didn't know a thing about Russiagate, but I doubt it. But if this were a novel, I'll leave you with the close here. I'd say we're getting to the interesting part. That's the commentary. This is Robert Romano, Vice President of Public Policy with Americans for Limited Government, dailytorch.com. Hit that subscribe button, ring the bell for notifications, and have a good day.